Picture this. It's 40 and 23, and Margaret, a servant girl in a wealthy merchant's household, realizes she's pregnant by her master's son, who has already been promised in marriage to another family. If discovered, she'll be cast out without references, her family will disown her in shame, and she'll face a life of destitution or prostitution with an illegitimate child who will bear the stigma forever. But Margaret has a plan that countless medieval women before her have used. She'll hide her pregnancy completely, give birth in secret, and somehow dispose of the evidence while maintaining her position and reputation. This isn't a story of shame or judgment, but of survival in a world where pregnancy outside marriage wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was often a death sentence for both mother and child. The reality of hidden pregnancy in medieval Europe was far more common and sophisticated than most people realize. Women across all social classes developed elaborate systems of concealment that allowed them to carry pregnancies to term while maintaining their social positions, economic security, and family relationships. These weren't just desperate acts of individual women, but organized support networks that provided practical assistance, medical knowledge, and safe haven for mothers who couldn't afford to let their pregnancies become public knowledge. Medieval pregnancy concealment began with understanding the social and legal consequences that made secrecy essential for survival. Unmarried women who became pregnant faced complete social exile, economic ruin, and legal penalties that could include public humiliation, fines, or even physical punishment. The children of such relationships were considered illegitimate and faced lifelong discrimination that affected their legal rights, inheritance prospects, and marriage opportunities. The clothing strategies used to hide medieval pregnancies were remarkably sophisticated and reflected deep understanding of how to manipulate fabric, layering, and body positioning to disguise physical changes that would otherwise reveal pregnancy. Medieval women's clothing was naturally loose and layered, providing some natural concealment, but pregnant women developed specific techniques that went far beyond normal fashion choices. But here's where medieval pregnancy concealment becomes truly fascinating. These weren't just individual survival strategies, but community knowledge passed down through networks of women who understood that pregnancy concealment was sometimes necessary for survival. Experienced women taught younger ones how to bind their bellies, modify their clothing, and change their posture and movement patterns to avoid detection during the most dangerous months. The binding techniques used to compress and disguise growing bellies were sophisticated systems that balanced concealment needs against the health risks of restricting fetal development. Women used strips of linen, leather, or other materials to create compression garments that flattened their profiles, while still allowing enough room for basic fetal growth. These binding systems required careful adjustments throughout pregnancy and knowledge about when compression became dangerous. Clothing modification involved altering existing garments or creating new ones that incorporated design features specifically intended to hide pregnancy. Loose outer robes, strategic draping, and layered garments could disguise body shape changes, while careful color choices and fabric patterns drew attention away from the midsection. Some women wore false padding in other areas to create different body proportions that made pregnancy changes less noticeable. Postural and movement changes required conscious alteration of natural body mechanics to avoid the characteristic walk, posture, and gestures that revealed pregnancy to observant community members. Pregnant women learned to control their gait, avoid protective hand positions over their bellies, and maintain normal activity levels despite physical discomfort and fatigue that naturally accompanied pregnancy. The medical knowledge available to medieval women who needed to hide pregnancies included understanding of herbs and treatments that could potentially end unwanted pregnancies. Though these remedies were often dangerous and unreliable, women shared information about plants like pennyroyal, tansy, and rue that were believed to cause miscarriage, though the dosages required for effectiveness often approached toxic levels that could kill the mother as well. Professional assistance from midwives, herbalists, and other medical practitioners created underground networks that provided pregnancy-related services to women who couldn't access conventional medical care. Some practitioners specialized in discreet pregnancy management, offering services that ranged from pregnancy confirmation to abortion attempts to secret birth assistance. The timing of concealment efforts reflected understanding that pregnancy became harder to hide as it progressed, requiring increasingly sophisticated strategies during later months when physical changes became more obvious. Early pregnancy could often be concealed through minor clothing adjustments and careful behavior, But late pregnancy required major lifestyle changes and often complete withdrawal from normal social activities. Seasonal variations affected concealment strategies as winter clothing provided better natural concealment than summer garments, while agricultural cycles determined when women could withdraw from public activities without arousing suspicion. Some women timed their pregnancies to coincide with seasons that offered better concealment opportunities, though such planning was often impossible given limited birth control options. The social support networks that assisted women in hiding pregnancies included family members, friends, employers, and religious institutions that provided practical help, emotional support, and safe spaces where pregnant women could retreat during the most difficult periods. These networks operated largely in secret and faced legal and social risks for assisting women in pregnancy concealment. Religious institutions played complex roles in pregnancy concealment, sometimes providing sanctuary for desperate women while officially condemning extramarital pregnancy. Some convents and religious houses offered temporary refuge for pregnant women, allowing them to give birth in secret before returning to their normal lives. However, such assistance often came with religious obligations and moral expectations that affected women's future choices. Economic factors drove many pregnancy concealment decisions as women who lost their employment or family support due to pregnancy often faced destitution or death. Servant women were particularly vulnerable because pregnancy could result in immediate dismissal without references, making future employment impossible. Married women sometimes concealed pregnancies to avoid economic burdens their families couldn't support. The legal consequences of discovered pregnancy concealment varied between regions, but often included severe penalties for both the women involved and anyone who assisted them. Laws against infanticide, abandonment, and concealment of birth created legal frameworks that criminalized many aspects of hidden pregnancy, though enforcement was often inconsistent and depended on local authorities and community attitudes. Class differences created dramatically different experiences for women attempting pregnancy concealment, with wealthy women having access to private physicians, discreet accommodations, and financial resources that made concealment easier, while poor women relied on community support and often faced greater risks of discovery and punishment. The techniques for secret birth involved elaborate preparations that allowed women to give birth without medical assistance while managing pain, complications, and the disposal of evidence that could reveal what had occurred. Some women gave birth alone in remote locations, while others relied on trusted assistants who provided minimal help while maintaining secrecy about the event. Pain management during secret birth relied on herbal remedies, physical techniques, and psychological preparation that helped women endure labor without the medical support and pain relief that would normally be available. Women prepared birthing areas, gathered necessary supplies, and developed plans for managing complications that might arise during unassisted delivery. The disposal of evidence after secret birth included managing the placenta, bloody materials, and sometimes the infant itself when survival was impossible or undesirable. These practical challenges required advanced planning and often involved assistance from others who helped clean up evidence and dispose of materials that could reveal what had occurred. Infant survival strategies for women who successfully concealed pregnancy and birth included finding wet nurses, arranging adoptions, or placing children with religious institutions that could provide care while maintaining secrecy about the child's origins. Some women attempted to raise their children secretly while maintaining their public lives, though this required enormous ongoing deception and support. The psychological toll of pregnancy concealment created enormous stress, anxiety, and isolation for women who had to maintain normal appearances while dealing with physical discomfort, emotional challenges, and constant fear of discovery. Many women suffered from depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems related to the strain of maintaining elaborate deceptions for months at a time. Recovery after secret birth required physical healing while immediately returning to normal activities and social roles without revealing what had occurred. Women had to manage postpartum bleeding, breast milk production, and physical weakness while maintaining work responsibilities and social obligations that couldn't be postponed without arousing suspicion. The long-term consequences of successful pregnancy concealment included ongoing psychological effects, relationship changes, and the constant risk that secrets might be discovered years later. Women who successfully hid pregnancies often lived with permanent anxiety about discovery and faced complicated relationships with any surviving children, who might learn about their origins. Regional variations in pregnancy concealment reflected different cultural attitudes, legal systems, and social structures that influenced how communities dealt with extramarital pregnancy and what resources were available to women who needed assistance. Some regions were more tolerant of illegitimate pregnancy, while others imposed harsh penalties that made concealment more necessary and more dangerous. The international context of medieval pregnancy concealment included trade networks, religious movements, and political changes that affected women's options and opportunities for managing unwanted pregnancies. Some women traveled to different regions where they weren't known to give birth in secret, while others took advantage of political upheavals that disrupted normal social monitoring. The decline of traditional pregnancy concealment strategies resulted from changing social attitudes, improved medical care, and legal reforms that reduced the extreme penalties associated with extramarital pregnancy. However, many of the techniques and support networks developed during the medieval period continued to influence women's reproductive choices well into the modern era. Medieval pregnancy concealment practices established precedents for modern reproductive privacy, medical confidentiality, and women's healthcare that continue to influence contemporary approaches to pregnancy management and reproductive rights. The emphasis on women's autonomy, discreet medical care, and support networks evolved directly from medieval traditions that recognized pregnancy as sometimes requiring secrecy for survival. Most importantly, medieval women who successfully concealed pregnancies demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness, courage, and community solidarity in facing circumstances that threatened their survival and social existence. They proved that women can develop sophisticated strategies for managing reproductive challenges when social and legal systems fail to provide adequate support or protection. So how did medieval mothers hide their pregnancies for 9 months? They developed comprehensive concealment systems that combined clothing techniques, medical knowledge, social support networks, and psychological resilience to maintain secrecy during pregnancies that could destroy their lives if discovered. They created underground systems of mutual assistance that provided practical help and emotional support for women facing impossible choices in societies that offered little tolerance for reproductive autonomy. They understood that pregnancy concealment required not just individual determination, but community cooperation and sophisticated knowledge about medicine, law, and social dynamics that could make the difference between survival and destruction. They proved that women facing reproductive challenges can develop remarkable innovations and support systems when conventional social institutions fail to provide adequate assistance or protection. The next time you consider reproductive privacy or appreciate the medical and legal protections available to modern pregnant women, remember the medieval mother who bound her belly with linen strips, modified her clothing and posture for months, and gave birth in secret to protect herself and her child from social consequences that could destroy both their lives, in a world that offered little tolerance for pregnancy outside the narrow boundaries of acceptable social arrangements. If you enjoy the hidden sides of medieval life, hit subscribe and give this video a like.